Hello everyone, in today's video we are going to be bringing out as much color as we can out of this picture to make it look like this one. Bright, colorful, with lots of personality. To get started we're going to jump into Photoshop Camera Raw Filter and make some adjustments before diving into the more detailed editing. I'm going to start out by brightening up the image to reveal some of the colors and then lowering some of the highlights and the whites. The reason why I'm doing this is because the sky and the lake are a little bit too bright with white and I want to see what the original colors were. When I lowered the whites especially, it brought back quite a bit of blue in the image. So to make it look even nicer and brighter with color, I'm going to bump up the vibrance to highlight some of that blue back in there. Because blue is a major part of this entire color scheme, I'm going to use Color Mixer to bump up the blue and teal even further. Whenever I work with individual colors, I make sure to go very slowly when increasing the color profile, because if you go overboard with it, it could look unnatural pretty quickly. So I make sure to make this a very gradual adjustment. The next step is separating and working on the subject. This, in my opinion, is a very crucial step in getting a nice and colorful image. Often the subject color scheme is very different from the background, so we need to highlight those individual colors by themselves. In this photo, the subject is mostly white and yellow, while the background is mostly blue, so we want to bring in back some of that yellow. I usually use Photoshop's Select Subject tool. It does a pretty good job of selecting the subject automatically without having to make manual adjustments. So there are a couple of ways to make the subject pop from the background. One of those is to brighten the subject's exposure in contrast to the background. The second thing I usually do is to change the temperature. Again, in this particular image, the tones of the subjects are yellow, so we really want to warm up the skin tone by increasing the temperature. Again, I do this very incrementally, so not to make the subject too yellow or too orange or any other unwanted color. At this point, I'm pretty happy with the initial adjustments, so I'm going to jump into Photoshop to do all the detailed work on the skin, retouching using a healing brush, frequency separation, and a little bit of curves adjustments. If you just want to see the color adjustments, skip over to minute 5 to see the rest of the adjustments that I made in the colors. Now that I have completed the skin retouching, I'm going to move back into making the color adjustments. When I do this, I create a new layer with all the edits I have done so far. As I mentioned in the beginning of the video, the background and the subject are usually very different color profiles, so I want to separate the two again to really work on the individual colors of each part of the image. My goal is to make the subject stand out from the background. So I start out by selecting the subject using Photoshop subject selection tool, and then I open up the camera raw filter. There are two things that I'm trying to accomplish here. One is to brighten up the subject, and two is to intensify the yellows and the oranges to make the skin tone look really warm and glowy. To do this, I increase the orange and yellow in the color mixer and warm up the temperature. Then I go in and play around with exposure and highlights. It does take a little bit of experimentation before I find the right balance between the two to accomplish my goals. As you can see, just by balancing the vibrance, the colors, and the highlights with the exposure, the skin tone really starts to get that warm glow in it, and it will look really nice against the really blue background. So now I'm ready to invert the selection to work on the background. While I'm satisfied with the blues that are already there, I want to increase them just a little bit more so that they really pop against that warm skin that we just adjusted. So I'm going to jump straight into the color mixer and adjust it, make the teal pretty much the maximum along with the blue to make them very intense, and then I'm going to play around with the shadows. In this case, the exposure and playing around with the shadows evens the color across the photo quite nicely, so that's why I'm doing that there. And then I'm adjusting the vibrance to bring out the color just a tiny bit more. At this point, I'm pretty much done. I'm going to deselect all the layers that I have created to check the edit that I have made compared to the previous photo. Even though I do love the color, I think I overdid it just a tiny bit, so I'm going to decrease it just a little bit in the percentage to make sure that none of the color is too overwhelming. I tested it out at 90, but that was still too much, so I'm going to decrease it to 80 and make sure that the layers underneath show through. Here's the final edit before. The colors were pretty much all washed out, and now with the after, the colors are vibrant, the skin tone is pretty glowy. You could still play around a little bit more with the colors to make sure that none of them are too overwhelming. I think that the fill could have been decreased just a little bit, but with this video, the idea was to show you how the colors can be made to stand out, and you could keep customizing it as much as you want to until you feel satisfied. Hopefully this was a good video and it was useful. Let me know if you liked it in the comments and any suggestions that you might have. Don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Thanks guys!